Hello and welcome to the episode of In the Trench with Gang Green. I'm your host Blair, also known as Bubbs. Today we're joined by a very special guest, Amir Farrell of Broncos Avenue. Joins us today to preview Jets Broncos Week 5 of the NFL season. Amir, thanks for stopping by. How's it going, man?
Thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it. Great podcast here. I'm delighted to, be the person that you choose to be on your show, man. I really do appreciate it. I'm doing great, man. Week 5 of the NFL, obviously. I know that I can speak for the both of these teams. We're not where we want to be record-wise, but football is football. Anything can happen. The impossible is always possible, especially when our team's giving up 70 points. Anything can happen. So thanks for having me on the show, man.
Yeah, totally. Thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it. It's going to be a lot of fun. Going to break down all angles from this matchup. I guess we could start here. Again, 2-1-3 teams, two teams that are, really desperately looking for a victory. Obviously, the Broncos trying to build off of last week's win, and the Jets trying to find their first win after the Xavier Gipson punt return victory over the Bills on Monday night. So I guess just to start from your perspective here, what is your perspective, obviously, on the Broncos as obviously being a Broncos fan, and then your perspective on what the Jets have done 4 weeks in from an outside fan perspective going into this matchup?
Yeah, I think offense has been clicking for us, obviously. A lot of people that do know, if you're not just watching the box score and everything, you would know that Russell Wilson, Sean Payne, the relationship is mended very, very well. Diana Rossini of the ESPN has spoken very highly of those two and what they've built already in such a short period of time. It's a brand new offense, and I was expecting them to get off a slow start, but they're averaging like north of 23 points per game. And once the playbook opens up even more, and once these young guys are learning the offense, it's an advanced Sean Payne offense. So once they do start getting things down and the defense actually starts playing good ball, this offense could be a lot more high powered, even with not the best talent. Defensive side of the ball, though, is the reason we've lost all 3 games on our obviously on our schedule so far. Allowing 70 points to the Dolphins, allowing 35 to the Sam Howell-led Commanders. I mean, look what Sam Howell's done other than the Broncos game. I mean, that just speaks for itself. And then we go make Justin Fields had like 3 touchdowns the first 3 weeks of the season, and then he has 3 touchdowns in the first half against our defense. I mean, that's basically the story of the tale for the Broncos. It really sucks that defense is what we had that was the only thing we had last year that was so elite. I mean, it was in the top 5 conversation, top 5 rankings week in and week out. We were so confident on that side of the ball going into the year, and then with Vance Joseph, everything's just kind of like falling apart. But on your guys' side of the ball, I mean, it's almost the exact opposite. I mean, defense is literally, from my perspective, the outsider looking in, your guys' defense is nothing short of stellar. I mean, very stout defense, a lot of good playmakers, very, very elite defensive line. I mean, it's going to be easily probably the toughest test for a defense-wise for the Broncos so far in the schedule. So it'll be a very tough matchup, in terms of those coordinator matchups between Sean Payton and Robert Saleh. And then obviously for you guys' offense, you guys really you found something last week with Zach Wilson. You showing that a lot of that raw talent was coming to life in that game, and I like the game plan they put together. Obviously, things didn't go the way they planned. I would have loved to see you guys beat the Chiefs, especially with Taylor Swift in attendance.
Yeah.
Would have been good to see you guys get a win against our division rival and see Zach Wilson get that well-deserved win. Obviously, it was kind of tough to see, at the end, him, putting a loss on him. I love the accountability and the maturity he's taken on himself ever since Aaron Rodgers came in the building, and then him getting injured. He's taken a lot more accountability. He's just a much more mature player. So because of that, I have a lot more respect for him. And then I think once you guys, I know I saw Breece Hall is not going to be on a limited snap count anymore. So I think once the running game is really established, and once his connection with Garrett Wilson and Allen Lazard, all those receivers, I think you guys can definitely pick up some steam, because I will say you guys do have a lot more optimism as a team than the Broncos do. So.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what we were saying there, especially about, Zach Wilson and taking accountability, where something last year that we didn't see out of him. We, after that Patriots game, as most of us Jet fans remember last season, didn't take accountability, was blaming it on all other things. To see him take that accountability, even though I wouldn't say the loss was on him, it was still good to see him take that leadership role. You mentioned, we'll get back to a little bit of the Broncos offense here, but there was a little bit of news defensively for the Broncos today, and then we'll kind of break down what their defense has done overall. The whole Randy Gregory situation, how do you feel that kind of played out? Was that him? Was that Sean Payton influence? How did you see that totally unfolding?
Yeah, so there was a bit of a dispute between 2 reporters. Benjamin Albright, Broncos insider, said that Gregory did not want to leave. He didn't request a release. But then you have Mike Kliss, who's a very highly renowned Broncos insider. I trust him from all my information. He says it was a mutual thing where Randy Gregory approached the staff in front office for a release that he obviously wished for, and they obviously granted that release this morning. So it was a mutual type deal. That's what I think about it. But just in terms of how Randy Gregory has been ever since he signed that 5-year, $70 million contract, obviously we poached him from the Cowboys at the last minute. Obviously, looking in hindsight, I kind of wish he would have just signed with the Cowboys instead, because the injuries have been a major issue for him. And then whenever he's not injured, and he's actually available for the team, it's like you have to play like an elite rusher when you're paying you some of the top end money in the NFL. And this year, he's just been very, very lackluster. I mean, you watch film, you watch everything, and he's just getting manhandled. And it's not like these are like highly experienced veterans and very talented veterans. Like, this is Darnell Wright in the Bears game that's handling him every other rep. Like, it's very bad. Our run defense is the worst in the NFL. I think we're giving up like 170 on the ground going into the Bears game on an average. I mean, it's just ridiculous, and he's a big reason for that. Just horrible at setting the edge, very lackluster. He played 10 total games with the Broncos and only had 3 sacks and 10 total pressures in all those games. And I mean, once he lost his starting job to our second round pick, Nick Bonito, last week, and Nick Bonito had nearly 3 sacks. I think all Broncos country was in agreement that it was time for him to go. I was hoping we could have pried some draft capital in return for him, but instead he ends up, parting ways with the team, and the Broncos walk away with basically nothing in reward for that contract.
Yeah, definitely interesting to see it from your perspective, because it was a little bit surprising, obviously, on the outside, but as you mentioned, wasn't quite playing up to that label that they put on him early on there. So, you mentioned the run defense, you mentioned a little bit of the struggles. What do you feel the Broncos need to do or make adjustments to get right, to get back to being at least just competent on defense? I feel like it's the opposite, because the Jets, the defense isn't the concern. It's competency on offense. For you guys, it's just be competent on defense, just be average. We're not asking for much. What do you feel they need to do? You mentioned being last against the run, they're in the bottom of the league in pretty much every statistical category when it comes to the defense. What do you feel they need to do to make those adjustments, especially going into this game?
I mean, there's a multitude of things that you can bring up, but if I could really solve the puzzle just like that, I wish I could, and I wish it was that easy for Vance Joseph. Obviously, the biggest thing Broncos fans have resorted to immediately saying, fire Vance Joseph, that fixes everything, but I don't think it'll be that easy. You have Christian Parker, who a lot of Broncos fans and coaches think very highly of. He's our DB's coach, highly experienced. He was a Vic Fangio hire, and from him being all the way from the Vic Fangio to the Nathaniel Hackett, now the Sean Payton staff, that speaks highly of how well of a coach he is to remain through 3 different entire coaching staff. So he could be an option as a defensive play caller. I've thrown out the idea of maybe handing over play calling duties to him if, the defense continues to struggle. It seems like Sean Payton wants to ride with Vance Joseph. So they're not going to fire him this early in the season. But just in terms of player personnel, I've thrown out the idea of throwing Drew Sanders in an edge a little bit. He hasn't been the best at linebacker so far. He got his first start against the Bears. And then obviously in the Dolphins, he played a lot with Josie Jewell out with a hip injury. And he had a very, very bad game tackling. I mean, coaches, players are ripping into him. So I've thrown out the idea of, he was really good at Bama. I mean, he was a 5-star recruit at Bama, being an edge rusher, and he was just really, really talented. He's got a lot of that, all the intangibles to be an elite rusher sometime in the league. But Vance Joseph wants to stick him at linebacker. I think if you honestly, at this point, when you're giving up 70 and then you're giving up 28, 35, I mean, you got to start changing up something, personnel wise. Like, we have other corners that maybe could go to nickel, and other outside corners maybe at safety. Like, I think Sean Payton's sending a strong message moving on from Randy Gregory, and then obviously our starting slot corner week 1 was the same Bassey, and we just cut him yesterday. So it's clearly they're sending a strong message, and I think the biggest thing is just like effort and communication. I mean, there's a lot of guys coming back this week. You got Justin Simmons, you got PJ Locke, two safeties, two veterans that are high voices. Like when you watch the film, especially that Dolphins game, you could tell there's just like no kind of communication. Like guys are throwing their helmets on the sidelines. Guys aren't really talking to each other. Like the communication is just
Mhm.
completely off. And the biggest thing is body language, and you got to be full effort on the same page with everybody. And it is just very obvious that this defense isn't bought into what Vance Joseph is doing and coaching, and just all around, it's a mess, man. I mean, you look back all the way to like the 1970 merger, and we're one of the worst defenses like of
Mhm.
all time. Like it's pretty bad. We have the worst like DVOA, I believe, of all time. So something's got to give because it's holding this team back from being very well like 3-1 right now.
Yeah, totally. I mean, 70 points is brutal. No matter which way you try to dice
Tell me
it up
about
or
it.
whatever. It's ugly for sure. Um, the Jets last week we saw Zach Wilson. They kind of aired it out a lot more with him. They only ran the ball 16 times. We're able to get over the 100-yard mark. Brees Hall, we were talking a little bit about this early on. Doesn't not a pitch count or snap count, whatever you want to call it anymore. Comes into this game. We all know what happened last year. Unfortunately, had the big run against them last year. How do you feel they're going to approach Brees Hall? Do you expect them to potentially stack the box, which is what other teams have done to the Jets if Zach, struggles early on, where they're forcing them to pass as opposed to, obviously running, where last week the Jets were able to air it out? How do you expect to kind of see the Jets come out and then Broncos counteract that with Brees Hall finally being out there, getting a lot more carries than he has?
Yeah, I would like to see them use a different, like a variation of blitz packages when it comes to Zach Wilson pressuring him. He was not the best when he's under pressure. He kind of gets flushed a lot. And then just in general, like the linebackers, second level of the defense, I mean, the defensive line, it's got to be on point. I mean, Brees Hall is a very, very talented player. I mean, he got selected where he did because of that,
Mm-hmm.
out of Iowa State. So, I mean, he's a very talented player. You can't take it for granted. Like I said earlier in the show, I mean, our run defense is historically bad. I mean, Khalil Herbert had 100 yards rushing last week, like it was nothing. Devon Achane at 200 in one of his first games against us, obviously in that 70 piece. So, and then Raheem Mostert. I mean, there's just plenty running backs that we have been very, very bad. I mean, if you have Brees Hall in your fantasy team, start him this week. Like, if I'm being honest, I don't have a lot of confidence that Brees Hall can actually be shut down by this defense. Like, I just don't have much reason to believe that Vance Joseph, because Vance Joseph, the biggest thing with him is like a lack of creativity. Like the blitz packages are very, very poorly drawn up. I mean, there's just not much to really give to be excited about for that defensive line. It's easily, I always say, it starts in the trenches, it starts up front. And while you can say our secondary is really, really bad, it's because our defense gets no type of pressure, and they're always letting offenses establish a run. And when you establish a run, that sets up your play action, bootleg, everything. That opens up everything for the passing game. So, like I said, I mean, they got to change something this week, and hopefully with some key pieces returning. I know Baron Browning's coming off the PUP list. He's not expected to play in this game, barring any unforeseen circumstances. But we do have some players coming back, so hopefully that'll change something. But like I said, Brees Hall, very talented player. I could see him pick it up 100 easily in this game.
Yeah, it's obviously, from where I'm coming from, definitely hope there. I mean, 160 or 176 yards per game, is what, as you mentioned early on, 170 plus yards per game is, what Denver's letting up on the ground. And the Jets are always been a run first team. So it's going to be interesting to see how that all plays out. And if they go with the run early on or do what they did last week, try and go past to set up the run. But definitely something to look out for. One more thing defensively, Garrett Wilson, obviously, the number one, Lazard as well, versus guys like Surtain in the secondary. What matchup, I guess, in the secondary are you most looking forward to seeing, on Sunday from a receiver corner perspective with Garrett Wilson, Surtain, and guys like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest one obviously is Garrett Wilson versus Passer Tan. I mean, I think that's easily where Vance Joseph is going to have PS2 lined up with. Garrett Wilson, very, very special player. I thought if Aaron Rodgers, was able to, if he stayed healthy, and played this whole season, that Garrett Wilson could have very well been a 1,300, maybe even 1,400
Mm-hmm.
yard receiver. But I still think even last year, like getting 1,000 with Zach Wilson speaks to how talented he is, even in a down year, bad year for Zach Wilson. So that's probably the biggest matchup I'm looking forward to. Justin Simmons should be playing this week, so you could look out for him. Obviously, he's a free safety, so he's going to be kind of helping out wherever he can in the the third level of the defense. But I think those are the two biggest things I'm looking out for. If you can shut down Garrett Wilson, your number one weapon, and that's going to force Garrett Wilson to distribute the ball in other places. So that's probably the biggest matchups I'm looking for.
Yeah, totally. Once again, we're talking to Amir Farrell here from Broncos Avenue. Switching over from defense now to the offensive side of the football for Denver and defensively for the Jets. You talked a little bit about Russell Wilson. What have you mainly see from his game, and what should Jets fans expect going into this matchup from Russell Wilson for the player he was last year to now under Payton?
Yeah, he's a much better pocket passer last year than he was with Nathaniel Hackett. But I think the biggest thing is he's using his legs a lot more efficiently, and he's moving with purpose. Like last year, everything was so not really off script, but it just wasn't fitting what Russell Wilson does the best. I thought what Nathaniel Hackett had planned out for Russ last year didn't, fit to his strengths. And what he's doing this year, I mean, Sean Payne, you could tell right off the bat, like throwing over the middle of the field. What did Drew Brees do the best in New Orleans? It's throwing over the middle of the field, nearly dead accurate. He was always around that 70% completion mark. I think Russ so far this year is at 67, nearly 68% on the year. I mean, it's remarkable how the translation we're seeing from what Sean Payne did immediately with Drew Brees in New Orleans to immediately with Russell Wilson this year in Denver. I know it's a 1-3 record, but Russell Wilson statistically is playing like a top 10 quarterback. Like, I don't think that should be taken lightly. A lot of fans would like to tell you regardless. I do think it is a fair point that we have faced like not great defenses in, Washington and Chicago. But I will say, I mean, he's operating the offense very well. Very well. And like I said earlier in the show, it's once these guys start picking up things, and once they're getting more comfortable and experienced with offense, that's going to open up even more. And I'm not sure when that will happen. It could happen this week. Like I said, it's a very elite defense. But I will say he's not picking up a lot of rushing yards. But Sean Payne is doing such a good job of him getting it out and play action, establishing the run game, and making Russ comfortable with being that off script quarterback that he once was in Seattle, where he's just flushing out of the pocket and making all the throws that we all know Russell Wilson to make.
Yeah, my biggest thing with the Jets is, as you mentioned, rolling out of the pocket, and if he wants to run it. Is the Jets at times, that's something that they've got to do well on Sundays. If he does decide to go out and run, they got to stop him. They've struggled against, specifically for some reason, it's just scrambling quarterbacks and in tight ends. We can't seem to stop those guys. So that's definitely an interesting matchup to watch. But yeah, I mean, you look at the numbers. Everyone likes to make fun of the whole let Russ cook type of thing. But if you take that out of the equation, you look at the numbers, he's definitely been solid up to this point, even with the defenses, but they haven't lost because of him yet. Last year, that was kind of the opposite. It felt where there was a couple of those games, that Colts game, if I recall, he's missing guys wide open. That's not the case this year. It's been defensively. So you go to the receiving core. We talked about Garrett Wilson, Pat Surtain. Well, receiving core as well for the Denver Broncos, and then for the the Jets corners with DJ Reed, who did pop up on the injury report today, but Saleh mentioned he is expected to play on Sunday. Michael Carter, Sauce Gardner versus guys like Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, Marvin Mims. Marvin Mims, a guy, rookie, Oklahoma, currently leads the team in receiving yards. What have been your impressions on him, and in just some of the other matchups we could see in the secondary between the Jets corners and then obviously your receivers?
Yeah, Marvin Mims is such a talented receiver, but it's kind of like it's almost criminal how underutilized he's been through the first 4 weeks. He has 242 receiving yards, and then only 9 catches. I mean, he hardly has any targets. And the thing is, like, he's hardly even on the field a lot. Like, we see a lot more Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, and Brandon Johnson, whereas Marvin Mims is playing a lot of special teams, but he's not getting a lot of opportunities in the receiving game. I mean, and when he is on the field, Sean Payne does such a phenomenal job of utilizing him correctly. And I think if he can finally unleash him this week, give him like, I don't know how many snaps, 25, and give him some good targets. Like, I would love for him to get 10 targets. I mean, I'm not too sure if it'll happen just because Cortland Sutton has been our more heavily targeted receiver the first 3 weeks. But he's one of those receivers, man, where if you get him out in the post, deep downfield, even a go routes, like he's gonna take the top off the defense. Is exactly what we've been missing since the departure of KJ Hamler and all the injuries he's been dealing with. So I think when they finally unleash him, those 30 yards per reception, it'll obviously go down. But I think with more targets, more opportunities, Marvin Mims could be in the offensive rookie of the year conversation. I truly believe that.
Yeah, totally. He's been, as you mentioned, been underutilized and kind of a guy that you feel if he gets a lot more, I mean, 242 yards. I mean, I think that's about 25, 26 average on just those 9 catches. So he's been definitely those big plays. What are your thoughts on Sutton and Judy this season so far?
Yeah, I mean, we just got done recording a pod on Jerry Judy. There's a lot of stuff going out right now. For a lot of people that don't know, he just tweeted out like 2 cryptic tweets yesterday. Saying he said too easy and then full of fake. So I'm not sure if that's football related. What it is, we can all speculate. But if that is Broncos related, it certainly can't be good. I mean, it doesn't give you any kind of exciting encouragement or reaction to that. So, in terms of what he's done on that field, man, I mean, he has been just wide open constantly all the time. You look at last year, the year before, even this year in Chicago, Miami specifically, just wide open all the time. That's been the one flaw by Sean Payton and Russell Wilson, is not including this guy and not designing plays specifically for him. I mean, you look at Justin Jefferson, you look at Jamar Chase, you look at all these premier wide receivers. They tailor their offenses to specifically get him the ball. They make him the identity of the receiving game. If you throw a Justin Jefferson here in Denver, I promise you, he's having nowhere near the production. And I'm just not too sure why, but Sean Payne, Russell Wilson, they like distributing the ball every like here and there. They don't like tailoring the offense and designing it to specifically make Jerry Jeudy the number one target. Like I feel like Jerry Jeudy is almost never the first read. It's always
Mm-hmm.
Cortland Sutton and then or like a running back. Like I think that's the one flaw that I would kind of give on Sean Payne and Russell Wilson. They just done a bad job of looking his way. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if the Broncos tried dealing him off in the coming weeks and try to pry away a second round pick for him. In terms of Cortland Sutton, very talented player. This year, he has the most receiving yards to the first 4 games since Emmanuel Sanders in 2016. So, I mean, he's playing really good ball, but that's because he's getting heavily targeted through the first 4 games. So, I think he's a good receiver. Just me personally, if we had a trade away receiver, it would be Cortland Sutton just because he's making a lot more money. He's our highest paid receiver. We have one of the highest cap rooms in terms of their wide receiver position in the NFL. So I would get him off the books and then feed Jerry Jeudy and Marvin Mims more, especially if we lose this week. I mean, let's be honest, 1-4
Yeah.
it looks a lot worse than 2-3, and at that point, you might have to rebuild and trade away some star players. So at that point, I would start looking to trade away Cortland Sutton and get him off the books. I think he's boosted his trade value enough for us to get a solid, pick in return.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, again, we talked about this a little bit early on, but like this game, again, from an outside perspective, it's 2-1-3 teams, but it's huge. It's massive for both these teams trying to get to
Yeah.
2-3, stay around that 500 mark, give you a chance as the season goes on, as opposed to 1-4. Then the Jets have Philly next week, which is tough. Go 1-4, 1-5. Once you get into that range, you kind of sell off mode, not focus on the postseason at that point. We talked a little about, again, also earlier on, the Jets defensive line. Bryce Huff's been a guy that's been very good, had a very good week last week against Kansas City. Quinnen's had half a sack so far coming off the big contract extension. He's been a guy I feel like is still waiting for that big breakout game, that 2-3 sack game where he just breaks out and dominates. Quincy Williams, linebacker, has been great. The Jets don't blitz a ton. How do you feel the Jets defensive line matches up against the Broncos offensive line?
I think our offensive
Yeah, vice versa. Yeah. Broncos offense line against Jets defense line. Apologize for that.
Yeah. Nah, I got you. The Broncos offensive line, I think, has been very solid. I mean, Russell Wilson is, I believe, the 10th most sacked quarterback, but that's kind of skewed. It's been a few like throwaway plays where he just kind of takes a sack. I wouldn't really put down the offensive line. We invested a lot of money there, so I would expect that money to pay off this weekend. I mean, you pay top 10 money, 4 years, $53 million to Ben Powers, 5 years, $87.5 million to Mike McGlinchey for a reason. And then Garrett Bowles is one of the higher paid tackles in the NFL. So you got to, invest that money for a reason, and that's got to pay dividends against a tough Jets D line. I spoke about it earlier in the show. Quinnen Williams, Jermaine Johnson. I mean, there's some McDonald. There's some really, really, really good players on the defensive line. I personally was very entertained by Hard Knocks this year. I don't usually watch it, but watching those guys on the defensive line, kind of the camaraderie and the relationships. I'm a big fan of that Jets D line. Always have been, always will. I mean, they've made some great investment, obviously the first round picks and everything to that defensive line. So like I said, I think that'll be easily one of our toughest matchups of the year. But I think it'll be a battle. Like I said, it's always everything always starts in the trenches. So I think that'll be the telling factor in this game as to how things go. Can we protect Russell Wilson, or is it going to be one of those days where the Jets wreak havoc and get around that 4 to 5, even 6 sacks?
So to kind of close things out here, we talked a little bit about, just everything on it. Well, we've talked a lot about everything on the field in the matchup, but you go back to the offseason, the Sean Payton comments to, regarding Nathaniel Hackett. How do you feel that's going to play any effect into this game? I'd like to think this Jet team comes out, rallies around Hackett this week. He's had an interesting start to his Jet career as a coordinator. The first 3 games were kind of ugly despite the win against Buffalo. Then last week, he really opened the playbook. I guess, what were your thoughts on those whole comments? And do you feel it's going to have any sort of impact on, maybe a way a team comes out, the Broncos against their former coach, offense coordinator, all that stuff? Do you buy into that much?
I thought it was very enticing at first. I think now, obviously, the drama has settled down a lot with Aaron Rodgers out. Obviously, he said, keep my coach's name out of your mouth. Now he's not going to be in this one. Maybe he'll be encouraging it a little bit on the sidelines here in the Mile High. But yeah, I think there's still a little bit of juice to it. Obviously, they're both 1-3, so a lot of that drama has been taken away. But I mean, it's still 2 football teams going head to head. Like you said, they're 2 football teams that the season is basically on the line. I mean, it's crazy to say only in week 5, but whoever loses this game could be, very well not making the playoffs. So I think there still is drama there. They're obviously all the Nathaniel Hackett, Sean Payton stuff. Sean Payton has, publicly apologized. Apologize. I'm not too sure if it was a real apology. Coaches obviously, PR and everything, they're kind of advised not to, say things like that. But I think there's still a little bit of drama there. Obviously, a lot of Broncos country. Then the Gang Green. I mean, obviously, a lot of these guys still want to carry that on. I'm sure within the next 48, 72 hours, a lot of that drama's going to come resurfacing. You're going to see a lot of the old quotes reposted and everything. I think come game time, a lot of that drama's going to come back to life.
Yeah, it should be interesting. Do you, just quickly here, and we'll finish things out in a second. Did you feel Hackett was just the biggest issue there last season, or did you feel it was accumulation? Did you feel it was mainly him?
I don't think it was mainly him. I think there's a multitude of things that went wrong. You can't just pin it on one guy. But I do have to say, I mean, if you look at from what Russell Wilson has been from week 1 to week 4 this year, as opposed to what he was all last year with Hackett calling plays, it's pretty evident that coaching was a big reason because of it. And Nathaniel Hackett did form that entire staff last year. I think the one only gift he gave us was Ejiro Evero, and then he ends up leaving because his buddy Hackett got fired. So that was the one thing we needed this year, is where all Broncos country would have loved to see Evero stay, but instead he goes to Carolina. But I'm not going to lie, I personally think Hackett was a big part of it. I do think the whole new atmosphere and everything, just learning a new offense and being traded to a whole new team and everything, did play a factor into Russ, playing terribly. But I will say I do pin a good amount of it on coaching and just the game plan and not tailoring much of any of the offense to Russell Wilson's strengths. I mean, it showed week in and week out. And then once he was fired and Justin Outten, our tight ends coach, was promoted to play caller, you saw Jerry Jeudy and Russell Wilson just lighting it up. I think he had over 5 touchdown passes in those last few games. I mean, you really saw what Russell Wilson should have been at the end of the season. And with Sean Payton now, it's exactly what Russell Wilson should have been from the get-go. So,
yeah, it should be interesting. It definitely was, a rough go last year, and now gets a second chance with a Jet team that's got to win this game for both teams. So to close things out, where can everybody find you? Doing a ton of stuff with the Broncos. Where can everybody find you on social media, your YouTube, and all that good stuff?
Yeah, you can find me over on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, at Broncos Ave. Broncos AVE. Someone took the Broncos Avenue username. I know Elon Musk said he'll be freeing up the inactive username. So hopefully I get the Broncos Avenue tag there on Twitter. But Instagram, you can find me at Broncos Avenue. That's where everything I've basically built from the ground up over there on Instagram. And then on YouTube and anywhere that you listen to podcasts, you can find the Broncos Avenue podcast. We're uploading episodes pretty much at least once every 2 days. This week we're uploading every single day. So Having a lot of fun over there. Then the last but not least, you can find me over on Predominantly Orange, writing for the Denver Broncos, covering the team, having a blast there. A great team of writers, and just taking it one day at a time, covering the Broncos. I know I'm going a little insane covering this team, especially after 7 straight years of just constantly reloading, and the team's just constantly below 500. It sucks, but this will always be my team till the end of time. But thanks for having me on the show, man. It was a good one. This has definitely been one of the better podcasts I've been on.
Yeah, awesome, tough. Thank you. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun having you on. A lot of fun, breaking down this matchup. Should be an exciting matchup. Hopefully, a close one, because there's been a couple of those blowouts this season for both teams. So hopefully we see a good close game. But yeah, I totally feel your pain. It's some of these seasons where they just go down the drain so quickly. You kind of question why am I still watching this team? But in the end, when you eventually win a championship, it's gonna happen eventually. It's gotta happen eventually. The Jets have got to eventually make the playoffs for the first time in forever. It'll be well worth it. So I thank you for coming on. Thank you everybody for watching on YouTube and listening wherever you get your podcasts. We'll have more episodes coming out here in a couple days. As always, hope you enjoyed it, and thanks for joining us.